In the shadowed world of New York's organized crime, the Mafia was more than a criminal network, it was an unspoken government of the underworld. Bound by secrecy, loyalty, and the ancient Sicilian code of Omertà, its members lived and died by silence. For decades, law enforcement and the public only heard whispers about its hierarchy and rituals. Then came the day a low-ranking soldier broke that silence. His name was Joseph Valachi, and his betrayal ripped the veil off the Mafia's deepest secrets. A street kid in the empire of vice. Joseph Michael Valachi was born in East Harlem on September 22, 1904, to impoverished Italian immigrants. Like many children of the overcrowded tenements, he grew up surrounded by gangs, hustlers, and bootleggers. School offered him little, the streets promised more. By the time he was 17, Valachi had joined a local burglary outfit known as the Minutemen, famed for breaking into homes and stores with lightning speed. Arrested in 1921 and released in 1923, he learned his first real rule of the criminal world: never talk. The 1920s were the golden age of crime. Prohibition had outlawed alcohol, but the thirst for it turned bootlegging into a billion-dollar industry. Italian-American gangs flourished, merging small-time hoodlums into organized empires. Valachi's knack for loyalty and quick thinking drew the attention of mob leaders who valued discipline over education. By the early 1930s, he was officially inducted into one of New York's 5 families, the Genovese organization, then under bosses like Lucky Luciano and later Vito Genovese himself. Valachi wasn't a glamorous gangster. He wasn't a flashy killer or smooth talker. He was a soldier, dependable, cautious, and utterly obedient. He ran numbers, handled gambling dens, and occasionally delivered messages that came with bullets. His world revolved around the Mafia's tight structure: boss, underboss, capo, soldier. Each man answered upward and expected loyalty downward. In return, Valachi got protection, power, and identity in a city where poor Italian boys otherwise vanished into the crowd. Prison, paranoia, and the kiss of death. The turning point in Joseph Valachi's life came decades later, in the 1950s, when America began cracking down on narcotics. Valachi, then in his 50s, was caught up in a drug trafficking case and sentenced to 15 to 20 years in federal prison. He was shipped to the Atlanta Penitentiary, an institution crawling with mobsters. Among them was his old boss and now bitter rival, Vito Genovese, serving time for narcotics smuggling. It was inside those concrete walls that the underworld's code of silence began to collapse. Valachi claimed that Genovese suspected him of cooperating with authorities and marked him for death. One day, Genovese supposedly gave him a kiss on the cheek, a gesture Valachi believed was the Mafia's kiss of death. Terrified, convinced his execution was imminent, he became paranoid and jumpy. In June 1962, in a moment of panic, Valachi spotted a man approaching him in the prison yard, someone he believed was an assassin sent by Genovese. Acting first, he attacked and killed the inmate with an iron bar. The victim, tragically, was the wrong man. Valachi was now a convicted murderer on top of his narcotics sentence. But the killing also sealed his fate in another way: the Mafia could no longer protect him, and Genovese would never forgive him. From soldier to snitch, facing life behind bars and haunted by the possibility of being killed by his own, Valachi made a fateful decision. In the summer of 1962, he began talking to federal investigators. His motives were part survival, part revenge. He didn't claim to be a moral crusader, he simply wanted to live, and perhaps to get even with the man he believed had betrayed him. What started as a desperate plea for protection turned into a groundbreaking collaboration. U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, then spearheading the government's war on organized crime, saw potential in Valachi's testimony. In 1963, the Senate's Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations summoned Valachi to testify publicly. For the first time in American history, a sworn Mafia member took the stand before television cameras and told the world about La Cosa Nostra, our thing. The man who named the Mafia. The televised Valachi hearings were an unprecedented spectacle. Americans watched in fascination as this short, ordinary-looking man in a plain suit described the inner machinery of organized crime. He detailed the Mafia's initiation rituals, structure, and terminology. He explained how bosses governed the 5 families: Genovese, Gambino, Lucchese, Bonanno, and Colombo, and how they divided territories, settled disputes, and enforced rules with executions. To the public, the Mafia had always been the stuff of rumor and Hollywood melodrama. Valachi made it real. His testimony confirmed that organized crime wasn't a loose network of gangs but a nationwide syndicate, with its own hierarchy, codes, and even tribunals. He drew organizational charts on chalkboards, illustrating how soldiers reported to capos, capos to underbosses, and underbosses to the Don. Attorney General Kennedy hailed Valachi's revelations as the biggest single intelligence breakthrough yet in combating organized crime. While his testimony didn't directly convict major figures, the crimes he described were mostly too old to prosecute. It revolutionized the way federal agencies investigated organized crime. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, could no longer deny the Mafia's existence. A betrayal that shook the underworld. For the Mafia, Valachi's betrayal was a catastrophe. The Code of Omertà had survived for generations, from Sicily to New York, ensuring that even under torture, mobsters would not betray their brothers. Valachi shattered that illusion. His testimony proved that fear could outweigh loyalty, and that even the lowliest soldier could bring down the House of Silence. Inside the underworld, he was branded a traitor. Word spread that a $100,000 bounty had been placed on his head. Every mob family, every connected criminal, knew that killing Valachi would restore some of the Mafia's lost honor. But the government wasn't about to let him die. Valachi was moved from prison to prison, kept in solitary confinement, and guarded around the clock. He would live the rest of his life behind bars, a marked man protected by the same system he had once defied. The myth, the movie, and the legacy. Valachi's story didn't end with the hearings. His life inspired journalist Peter Moss to write the Valachi Papers, 1968, a book that became a bestseller and was later adapted into a 1972 film starring Charles Bronson. The movie immortalized Valachi as both hero and villain, the man who dared to expose the Mafia but paid the price for doing so. Historians still debate how valuable his revelations truly were. Some argue that Valachi exaggerated his role or repeated information the FBI already suspected. Others contend that his cooperation gave law enforcement a psychological victory, a public confirmation that the Mafia was real, structured, and vulnerable. Regardless, his words helped shape the next generation of anti-racketeering laws, paving the way for the eventual RICO Act of 1970, which allowed prosecutors to charge entire criminal enterprises rather than individual members. Valachi himself lived quietly in custody until 1971, when he died at the Federal Correctional Institution in Latuna, Texas. Officially, his death was ruled a heart attack, though rumors persisted that the Mafia finally got to him. He was 66 years old, a man who had outlived both his friends and enemies, but never his own fear. The man who broke the code. Joseph Valachi's story is one of paradox. He was both the product and the undoing of the Mafia system. For years, he thrived in a culture that rewarded silence and punished weakness. Yet in the end, it was his voice, untrained, nervous, and trembling on a witness stand, that reshaped America's understanding of organized crime. In breaking Omertà, Valachi didn't simply betray a gang, he betrayed an idea, the belief that loyalty to the family was stronger than fear of the law. His testimony exposed the cracks in that mythology. After Valachi, other mobsters, Sammy, the Bull, Gravano, Joe Bonanno's lieutenants, and dozens more, would eventually follow the same path, trading loyalty for survival. The Mafia survived, of course. It adapted, retreated into silence again, and rebuilt. But it never fully recovered its aura of mystery. The American public now knew too much. The secret rituals, the blood oaths, the shadow hierarchy, all were dragged into daylight by a man who never imagined himself a whistleblower. In the history of crime, Joseph Valachi remains a strange figure, neither saint nor sinner, but a witness to his own corruption. He didn't set out to reform the world, yet his words did more damage to the Mafia than most bullets ever could. He became the Mafia's snitch, the man whose deadly betrayal marked the beginning of the end of the old world mob. In the story of the five families, his name will always stand apart, not as a boss, not as a killer, but as the soldier who talked. In the dim backstreets of East Harlem, where poverty and ambition often walked hand in hand, Joseph Michael Valachi was born on September 22, 1904. His parents were Italian immigrants, ordinary people struggling to survive in the unforgiving neighborhoods of early 20th century New York. For young Joseph, the streets were both a school and a trap. Crime was survival, and survival was an art. By his teenage years, Valachi was already known to police. He joined a gang called the Minutemen, burglars so fast they could break into homes and be gone in minutes. Arrests came quickly, but punishment did little to change his course. Released from prison in 1923, he stepped into a world transformed by prohibition, when alcohol became illegal and crime became big business. For ambitious street kids like Valachi, the 1920s were a ladder of opportunity, if one was willing to climb it with blood on his hands. He started as a driver for bootleggers, then worked his way into gambling and numbers rackets. In time, he caught the attention of mafia figures connected to the growing criminal empire of Lucky Luciano and Vito Genovese. By the early 1930s, Valachi had earned his button. He was a made man, a full soldier in the Genovese family, one of New York's 5 families that would dominate American organized crime for decades. His duties were routine but vital: collecting debts, enforcing payments, managing bookmaking and numbers operations. He wasn't a boss or a legend, but he was trusted, a man who followed orders without question. For men like Valachi, the Mafia offered identity, power, and belonging. The initiation ritual, a drop of blood burned on a saint's card, symbolized rebirth. From that moment, the family came before everything, before law, before morality, before life itself. The code of Omertà bound every member to absolute silence. Betrayal was death. Yet, the glamour of the Mafia was an illusion built on paranoia and fear. Behind the sleek suits and smoky clubs lay a world where loyalty could shift in a heartbeat and where one's protector today could be one's executioner tomorrow. In the 1950s, when the federal government intensified its war on narcotics, Valachi found himself caught in the web. He was convicted on drug trafficking charges and sentenced to 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Behind the bars of Atlanta Penitentiary, he met again the man he once called boss, Vito Genovese, now imprisoned for similar crimes. But prison turned alliances into death sentences. Genovese, paranoid and ruthless, suspected Valachi of being an informer. One day, he greeted him with a kiss on the cheek, a gesture Valachi interpreted as the infamous kiss of death. Convinced his days were numbered, Valachi lived in constant fear. In June 1962, panic took over. When he believed an inmate was sent to kill him, he attacked first, beating the man to death with an iron pipe. But the victim was innocent. That killing became the fatal turning point. Valachi now faced life behind bars, hated by his boss and haunted by guilt. And that's when he made the decision that would change history. Part 2, The Snitch Who Shattered Silence. With nowhere left to run, Joseph Valachi reached out to federal authorities in 1962, offering to cooperate in exchange for protection. What began as a survival tactic turned into one of the most significant betrayals in Mafia history. At first, investigators doubted him. Gangsters often talked big to save themselves. But when Valachi began naming names, describing structures, and explaining initiation rituals, the FBI and the Justice Department realized they had found something extraordinary: a man willing to expose La Cosa Nostra, our thing, from the inside. In 1963, under the direction of U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, Valachi was brought before the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. The hearings were televised, and for the first time, the American public watched a real Mafia insider speak openly about the secret society that had ruled the underworld for decades. Seated behind a microphone in a drab prison uniform, Valachi described the Mafia's structure: the boss, underboss, caporegimes, and soldiers, and its system of loyalty, discipline, and retribution. He recounted ceremonies of induction, where recruits swore blood oaths of silence. He explained how the 5 families divided New York like a corporation: Genovese, Gambino, Lucchese, Colombo, and Bonanno. To the astonishment of millions of viewers, Valachi wasn't just confirming rumors, he was mapping the Mafia's entire organization. For years, J. Edgar Hoover had denied the Mafia's existence. After Valachi, denial was impossible. The Valachi hearings electrified America. Newspapers ran his face on front pages. Television dramatized his words. To law enforcement, he was a hero; to the underworld, he was the ultimate traitor. The Mafia's sacred code of Omertà, its most powerful weapon, had been publicly broken. The fallout was immense. Mob families scrambled to contain the damage. Dozens of suspected informants were executed. Genovese himself, enraged, placed a $100,000 bounty on Valachi's head. But the government kept him alive, moving him constantly between prisons under heavy guard. Valachi's cooperation gave investigators a framework that reshaped how they fought organized crime. His testimony became the foundation for future laws, culminating in the RICO Act of 1970, which finally allowed prosecutors to dismantle entire criminal enterprises rather than chase individual crimes. Yet, Valachi's motives were never pure. He didn't claim righteousness or regret. He confessed not out of morality but out of fear. In interviews, he said plainly, "I did it because I wanted to live." That brutal honesty made him both despised and strangely human, a man shaped by a system he could no longer survive. In 1968, journalist Peter Moss published the Valachi Papers, chronicling his life and testimony. The book became a sensation and inspired a 1972 film starring Charles Bronson, forever cementing Valachi's image as the Mafia's snitch. The film depicted him not as a hero, but as a haunted man, a small cog in a monstrous machine who finally cracked under pressure. Valachi spent his remaining years in custody, always looking over his shoulder. He died in 1971 at a federal prison in Texas, officially from a heart attack, though rumors swirled that the Mafia finally caught up with him. Legacy of a betrayal. Joseph Valachi's betrayal didn't destroy the Mafia overnight, but it exposed its bones. His testimony stripped the underworld of its mystique and gave law enforcement a blueprint to fight it. He was the first to make the invisible visible, the man who turned whispers into evidence. But his legacy is double-edged. To the public, he became a symbol of truth. To his own people, he was a Judas who traded blood loyalty for breath. His story revealed a deeper truth about organized crime, that beneath the rituals and rhetoric, it was built on fear, not honor. The five families endured, evolving and surviving into the modern era, but never again could they hide completely behind the veil of silence. Valachi had cracked the code. He was no hero, no reformer, just a man who told the truth when the truth became his last weapon. In the saga of America's criminal empires, Joseph Valachi remains the soldier who broke Omertà, the snitch who changed history, and the face of the moment when the Mafia's deepest secret finally came to light.